Hello and welcome. My name is Tim McCracken from Crypto Academy World. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different on Crypto Insights. We're going to look at another YouTuber, Swan Signal Live, where he's discussing with three other people about why people just can't foresee what Bitcoin's going to do in 2025. This is incredibly insightful, so I'm going to play that and record that now for you. And then please feel free to make your comments below.
I think it's totally fair, by the way, that people don't trust or believe politicians in general. How many promises do they make that don't come to fruition, right? So it's reasonable that people have taken that stance, but there's too much evidence stacking up now that these things are going to happen. You got to take a side.
And let me just add one thing. There's all of these people that their main response is, oh, you're going to trust the government. Like it's some version of, what do you mean believe the government? What do you mean politicians lie? Yes, politicians lie, but that's a totally insufficient heuristic to navigate reality, right? If you were to count up the number of times politicians lied and then compare it to the number of times politicians told the truth, you'd have some on both sides. There'd be sometimes they lied, there'd be sometimes they told the truth. And so then you have this secondary question, which is, how do you determine which one it's going to be? How do you tell when a politician is lying? And how do you tell when a politician is telling the truth? Then you have a third part, which is it a lie if they tried to do it and failed because they got blocked by other apparatuses of government? I wouldn't personally call that a lie. I think a lie is they said they'd do it, they never tried, or they tried in an unserious way. It's not they tried really hard to get a bill through and it failed in the Senate. That's a different thing. Now, one of the reasons I think you should be bullish here is because the number of repetitions you're seeing, in my opinion, my way of parsing this information landscape, if Trump was not serious about this, you would have seen him talk about it once or twice and then basically shut up once the election's over. That's your signal. Your signal is that he talked about it when he was raising money and he shut up once he was president because he didn't need it anymore because he doesn't have another term. But the fact that he continued to talk about it and they have pushed out multiple facets of the administration to talk about it tells you that it's serious. It looks bad to talk about it 17 times and then not do it. Secondly, you should, I think, lean on the side I'm leaning in that this is going to happen, because as long as they don't have to requisition money from Congress, he has the ability to do this without involving other people, because there is this real challenge of getting it through.
It is a limited amount of funds that can be accessed through the executive branch alone. So
Correct.
Point being, the Lummis really needs support.
Yeah, there are some funds. He can do billions.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason for budget neutral purchases. Budget neutral is code for I don't need to ask Congress for money. I can just do it. It's all probabilities, but I would relate to these statements dramatically different than other politician stuff.
I think Alec has a good point that there are a lot of people out there who just have an inclination to say, I generally don't trust politicians. And it almost seems too simple. It's right. It's, oh, the politician's saying he's going to do this, but my investment thesis needs to be more complicated than that. There's probably many people like that out there. But then I think Stephen has a good point. All right, what about Trump on tariffs? This is as real time as it gets. If you believed Trump on tariffs, then maybe you would have actually sold some of your equities, sold some of your Bitcoin before this. So that's a real-time example where it's like, yeah, that actually was the case where you should have believed Trump. So I think that's a good point. Also, I think there's something to be said about, Brady, you were talking about the long-term thesis for Bitcoin, kind of foundational reasons to invest in Bitcoin. I think one of the reasons that, in addition to this stuff not being priced in, like Stephen was saying, I think it's just that Bitcoin is correlated to traditional markets. And I got this question from a group of clients that I was talking to earlier this week. And one of them just said, can you explain why is Bitcoin correlated to traditional markets, particularly the equity markets? And this is a question that I've gotten a lot. So I would love to hear you guys chime in on it, because to people who understand Bitcoin, quote unquote, understand Bitcoin, nobody understands Bitcoin, hat tip Jameson Lopp. But to the people who appreciate Bitcoin, it almost seems crazy. It's like, wait, the S&P 500 went down 5 or 10%. Why should Bitcoin go down? When I try to answer that question, I generally point to a few things. One is that Bitcoin is liquid, so it's easy to sell. If people just sense a turn in the market environment, they might sell some of their Bitcoin. There are a lot of leverage traders out there. If they have some leveraged position that needs to be covered, they can easily sell their Bitcoin at the drop of a hat. That's number one. Number two is that there is this perception that Bitcoin is a speculative asset, whether we like it or not. And large investors out there will treat it as a speculative asset, and that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, at least in the short term. And then item number three would be people are not 100% invested in Bitcoin, right? They have a portfolio of allocations, and I've noticed this firsthand a lot, that if someone's equities are down, I'm referring to 2022 here, if your equity portfolio is down by 25, 30%, it's very hard to convince that person, hey, now is a good time for you to buy Bitcoin. They're like on defense. They don't, even though that's a good time to allocate, usually, it's just hard to get that new incremental dollar coming in. So that's how I've answered that question. But do you guys have anything more to add of this, like, why does Bitcoin go down when the stock market goes down question?
Yeah, so it's that later point for me, that the second point you made for me is just that you need to realize that Bitcoin exists in a universe of other assets. Let's say the average Bitcoin investor has 5 or 10% Bitcoin, the rest is stocks. Like, most people are not all in Bitcoin. Like, those are the guys that probably aren't selling. And so, if you're running into the tariff launch and you're bearish because you're like, he's going to do this, he's actually going to launch these tariffs and the market's going to freak out. So then you go into risk off mode and you're saying, oh, I need to be like protective here. Bitcoin's one of the more volatile things, so it's going to go down more. That might be one of the first things you sell. You're protecting your portfolio. Similarly, once the drop's already happened, maybe you're getting margin called on a position and you need to raise money now. So you're selling across your asset portfolio. And even maybe you're tactically bearish before the tariff launch. So you're looking for something to short and you short Bitcoin. I think it's unreasonable to expect Bitcoin to not trade as a larger part of like asset universe in the modern world. Even gold during these days where everything sells off and it's a defensive asset. This is the point I'll always make. On days that were really panic capitulation in the stock market, gold was down 3% that day. There's nowhere to hide when these things come. And asking the question of like, when will Bitcoin decouple from this? It misunderstands the structure.
I also think part of it is people's understanding of Bitcoin or appreciation of Bitcoin in certain ways. I think the appreciation of Bitcoin as a store of value, as an established long-term store of value, and not just a speculative store of value, that understanding is growing for sure, especially with Bitcoin treasury strategies and that kind of education that's happening in the corporate world. It's also happening at the nation state level. This is an asset, a strategic asset. We should hold it for 20 years minimum, as is in the Bitcoin Act. Those ideas are there and they're becoming more established, but there's still a lot of investors who treat it like a stock, like an equity, and they're denominating their gains in dollars. They're not thinking about holding this percentage of the network for decades. They're thinking about making dollar gains. And that's going to continue to change as we go up that adoption curve of an established store value. So I think, but there's still quite a few people who are just trading based on dollar denominations, and that's going to continue. But I think as Bitcoin becomes more established as this uncorrelated long-term store of value, as a safe haven asset, then you'll just see that sort of those drops when equity markets are panicking, I think will start to diminish and it'll become more like gold and maybe even more stable than gold in times like that, or maybe even go up, as people move assets from these kind of short-term dollar denominated assets to a completely perfectly scarce asset that can't be debased in times like of economic trouble, where money printing is a very predominant solution to sort of quell the markets.
I want to drill down in that a little bit because I think this is good for people to understand. So there are times where the US market sells off and gold goes up. And there are times when the US market sells off and gold goes down. And that's the needle we're threading here. When the US market sells off because of certain war fears, certain types of fears, gold can rally on that, and it does happen. But not all times that stocks sell off does gold go up. Sometimes it goes down. The defining factor for where it goes down is basically where it's just like a market-wide margin call. It's just like a market-wide liquidity risk fear crunch. And in those moments, I think you could see Bitcoin's volatility go down. It could drop less, but I wouldn't want people expecting that it's going to somehow go up anytime the S&P goes down. You also don't want that because the S&P pretty much just goes up over time. And if Bitcoin only goes up when the S&P goes down, you have a problem. But I would love to see Bitcoin should rally if there's a bank crisis, if there's foreign tensions, if there's capital flight from other countries. Those are things that are bullish for gold that should also be bullish for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and we're getting there. It's just a matter of time.
But before we leave this topic, I agree with that. I just want to offer one scenario that I think is interesting that could play out this year. Let's hypothetically say the tariff talk heats up, stays hot, uncertainty stays with us for weeks, if not months. The Trump administration is willing to tolerate more of that pain that we talked about than maybe most people realize. So let's say equity markets stay flat, volatile to the downside. Just imagine that for a second. Now, also imagine that they find a budget neutral way to buy $1 to $5 billion worth of Bitcoin. That would, to me, would be the most fascinating market outcome to watch in 2025, because all of those macro wins are headwinds for Bitcoin. But then you have the idiosyncratic announcement of, oh, look, David Sachs and Howard Lutnick and Bo Hines, they figured out how to buy $2 billion worth of Bitcoin budget neutral. The US is serious about this.
So I'm sure that you will agree that was very insightful. One of the most important things that was covered there was the ability of the American government to buy Bitcoin without going to Congress. One of the ways they're actually looking at doing this is they're actually looking at selling off up to 25% of the gold in Fort Knox, hence the audit, which is many of the reasons why it's happening. They're probably going to get a bit of a shock. Supposedly there's meant to be like $400 million worth of gold has vanished. However, the value of gold on the American books at the moment was as per the last audit in 1974, which was $54 an ounce, and now it's over 3,000. So the value of the US gold is going to go up significantly. What that means is that they've got a huge amount of cash reserves that they can sell without having to go to Congress, without having to go to the American taxpayer to ask for money. And the point that was made here is that when the S&P market does drop and Bitcoin drops, if they're in that position to enter with billions and billions of dollars, they're going to make a significant amount of money and really boost the American balance sheet. So my name is Tim McCracken. I'm just going to wrap this up a little bit different than usual. Also, too, this is a new channel. It's an educational channel. It's not monetized. There's no sponsors. It's all privately funded. So I'd appreciate you subscribing and sharing. And I look forward to meeting with you. Now, if you'd like to subscribe and then just send us a message. If you're looking at other videos, our contact numbers are there. And we'll give you a consultation to create cash flow of positive nature with cryptocurrency to the value of $232. My name is Tim McCracken, and I look forward to seeing you soon.